About 2 months ago, I was looking in my class for my main class that I have for my major at the syllabus, and the dates had been confirmed as the semester wears on, and I saw that I had an exam on Friday. Well, that's good, except that the test was at 7 p.m. And I was aware that as winter comes towards us, by that time, 7 p.m. would be on the Sabbath. So I had experiences with that before. I went to the professor, and I spoke to the professor and said, listen, for religious purposes, I cannot take any secular or school activities after sunset on Friday. And he said, okay, very well, very respectful, and we'll try to figure it out. As the time progressed towards November 1st, when the exam was to be taken, I received an email about a week or 2 weeks before, and he said, due to all the requests we have received from other students as well, with many different times, we cannot accommodate everyone. So this is what we're going to do. We are going to let you take the exam as a take-home practice set, or a problem set rather. And here's the thing, you can use all your notes, and you can look at your books and all the lecture notes and everything, but you must get above a certain grade, a higher grade, and if you get even 1 point below that grade, you'll get a 0 for the whole exam. Essentially, failing the entire class. There's no way you can get a 0 and make it up in any way. So I got extremely scared at that point. I asked, is there any way we can maybe take it on the same day or on a later day, even earlier? I was scared of failing for the entire semester. I would have to take it again. It would mess things up very much. But he said, no, this is all we can do. So I said, okay, with the help of the Lord, I will study very hard, and the Lord will help me to get a good grade. And I was so stressed about it in the week leading up to it. And then finally, the Sabbath had passed. On November 2nd, after the exam date, we had the weekend to take it, to print it, and on Saturday at night, I looked at the email that the professor had sent, and I looked at the exam, and I started to do it, and it was so easy, because it came as references in my mind, and I knew where to look in my notes, and it was not difficult at all if we had everything in front of us. So for us, why do I say that story? Because we have a final exam that is coming for us. Amen? We are facing the end. And it is beautiful that the Lord has already given us a study guide as to how the final exam will carry out and what we must do to prepare for it, and not only to pass it, but to excel, and having done all to stand, as the Bible says. And I would like us to introduce this study with a review of the conference that we had recently, a couple weeks ago, where we spoke about present truth. And as we looked especially to the prophecies that pertain to our time, in the book of Revelation, specifically Revelation 13, we saw there a lot of descriptions about what is to come during our time. And I would like us to just review some of the key points, because Pastor David and Jordan, they already went through and they did a fantastic job of covering everything and showing how it pertains to us. And as we review, it says in Revelation 13 that I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. We went on to describe who that was, and we could see some of the characteristics of the papacy that was to rise in history. And we see here that there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. There was a set period of time that was to end in the year 1798. And we see that this was in the same prophecy that paralleled with the book of Daniel. And we were told what this entity would do, that he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. I would like us to keep that in mind as we go through our study. And the saints will be given into his hand until a time and the times and the dividing of time. This is all prophetic time, which we covered at that meeting. So we won't go in detail through it. But as we see in the history of the world, we have Babylon, we have Medo-Persia, then came Greece, and finally the Rome, which split up into 10 kingdoms, which make up the modern countries of Europe. And through those, the papacy was to rise. These are some of the descriptions that we already covered. And we see that these are the same. In Daniel and in Revelation, they pertain to the same one. So there's a special connection between the book of Daniel and Revelation. The two books studied together can give us insights into the time that will come. Okay, as we move forward and we look at these comparisons of the two powers, as we look at it, there was something else that was to come. We continued on, and here is I put here on the screen just the two powers, as it says in Daniel 7 and in Revelation 13. But there was someone else. After these 1,260 prophetic years were to finish in 1798, about that time there was given another vision, and there was seen something else. This is the verse in Revelation 13 that we see here in Revelation 13:11. That John says, I beheld another beast, or another kingdom, another country, coming up out of the earth. And he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. These are the powers, the entities that we are to contend with. The people of God will contend in the end. We went through history, and we went through prophecy, and Jordan did a fantastic job to identify all these kingdoms, and we see that this beast that is here mentioned in Revelation 13:11, who is it? Who is this beast? It is the United States of America in prophecy. This was what we were able to see. And this country that starts out so great, speaking, it is as a lamb, with 2 horns as a lamb, it starts to speak as a dragon. The dragon being representative of Satan. This is what will happen in the future. This is the test that we shall face in this country, in this great country, that will apostatize. So, I want us to focus the bulk of our study on a message of hope. We, at the conference, Jordan mentioned some things that I would like us to take note. He says here that the mark of the beast is received by those who are deceived before they are coerced. So there is a work of deception that this entity engages in. And God has given us some weapons specifically to combat those. So let us begin the important part of our study and talk about this message of hope that the Lord has given us. And I have a question. It is not a trick question at all. It is it's actually counterintuitive because it's very straightforward. This all happened in Revelation 13. Revelation 13, there's beasts and carnage and scary things going on. What comes immediately after Revelation 13? Revelation 14. Not a trick question. That's right. Revelation 14. What do we see in Revelation 14? What does God encourage us to see? The very next, after we see all these beasts doing all these horrible things, what is the very next thing that John sees? We read here, and I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. And what are these saints doing? What are they doing? And I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sung as it were a new song before the throne and before the 4 beasts and the elders. And no man could learn the song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne. What do we see immediately following Revelation 13? We see the people of God victorious over the beast, his image, and everything that Satan has to throw at the people of God. This is a picture of victory. And following these verses, God gives us something, because we are not in that state yet. Are we there yet? No. So what does God give us specifically in order to become that people? To become part of the 144,000. To become victorious. To stand with the Lamb on the mountain and sing the song of victory. What does God give us? The Lord gives us the three angels' messages to make us victorious. This is what God gives us. In Revelation 14, in answer to Revelation 13, are given us the three angels' messages. And also in Revelation 18, there's also another angel. This will be the focus of our study. As we have introduced them, we've introduced the problem, and now God has given us the solution of how we are to get there through the messages of these. What is the final message that God has for his people to fit his people for the kingdom of heaven? And this was the key text that we read. And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. God has a message for us, and here we identify two things. Two important things I want us to draw out of this text is that Babylon is fallen, and where are God's people? God's people are in Babylon. And so God is calling his people to come out of Babylon. So we see here in Revelation 14 and 18, God sends three messengers and a fourth. God sends four messengers to his people, these four angels. This is very interesting. This is very interesting as we move on, because it reminds me of a story. It reminds me of a similar story in the book of Daniel, where God sends to his people in Babylon, or he sends rather his people in Babylon, and there are three young men and the fourth, Daniel. As we looked in the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation, they were to be taken together. I believe that as we look in Revelation 14 and 18, and as we compare it to the story of the book of Daniel, we will be given insights into how to face this great test that we have coming for us. So let us look at this object lesson in the book of Daniel that we can compare with the messages in Revelation. In Daniel 1, we're told here that in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes. So Nebuchadnezzar wants to bring some of these Jews into Babylon. And who is among them? We read here in Daniel 1, verse 6, Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, 4 messengers. God sends the 3 young men and the 4th one. God sends 4 messengers into Babylon. 4 messengers into Babylon. Now, what do these names mean? I want us to look. There are lessons that we can pick from very minute details in this story. And this story is very profound as we continue to dig in, because we see that these names that were given, in the Jewish culture, names had meaning. They were to represent perhaps the character that the parent wished upon the child, or sometimes they were even prophetic character names. But as we look at what these names mean, we find something very striking. So we have Daniel, which means God is my judge. We follow with Hananiah, which means Jehovah has favored, meaning the grace of the Lord. We have Mishael, and this means who is like God, who is as strong as God is. And finally, Azariah, Jehovah has helped. Jehovah has helped. Interesting. As we take these names from the book of Daniel, that these 4 were brought into Babylon, We compare them to the book of Revelation because the four messengers in the book of Revelation correspond with them. In Revelation 14:6, we have the first angel's message. The first messenger, and let's pay attention to what is his message to the world. And we read here in Revelation chapter 14 and verse 6, "And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation, and kindred, and tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God, and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come. And worship him who made the earth, the heavens, and the earth, and the sea, and the fountains of waters." What is the first angel's message? It is one of judgment. As Daniel, his very name was a perpetual reminder to him that God is his judge, so we read in Revelation, we are to be aware of the judgment that is going on. What is happening right now? We've spent an entire quarterly talking about these events that are happening. Many Sabbaths we have looked at the books and the judgment that is taking place now. In Revelation 11, verse 1, there's also given us another description. And we're told here that there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood saying, Rise and measure the temple of God and the altar, and what else? Measure them that worship, that dwell therein. Measure the people. This is what this first message is to bring to our attention, that there's a very important event going on right now. We read, "The grand judgment is taking place and has been going on for some time. Now the Lord says, Measure the temple and the worshippers thereof. Remember, when you are walking the streets about your business, God is measuring you. When you are attending your household duties, when you engage in conversation, God is measuring you. Remember that your words and actions are being daguerreotyped or photographed in the books of heaven as the face is reproduced by the artist on the polished plate." Every moment, everything that is going on, there's something that we are to remember. As Daniel remembered every moment of his life, there is a judgment going on. And our lives are to come up before the judgment. They are to come up before God. And how shall they be? How shall we do in the face of this test? This is the first angel's message, the first one that we can look at. We continue. The next one. The next character in the book of Daniel, his name is Hananiah. And after we speak of judgment, we see here that Jehovah has favored. Jehovah has grace towards us. And we read here in Revelation 14 and verse 8, "And there followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication." And this, by implication, is telling God's people to come out of Babylon. Don't stay in Babylon anymore. Do not partake of Babylon's sins. Do not partake of her plagues. God is inviting us out of Babylon. When we come to church, do you know what is church? What does the word church mean? We look in the word, in the New Testament, in the Greek, it comes from the word ecclesia. And this is a gathering of citizens that comes out. And it's not just meaning to come out from your home. There's a deeper meaning. There's a deeper meaning. It means to receive a call to come out. When we are talking about church, we're talking about an agency where we are to come out from the world. And that is to call others to come out of the world. Because Babylon is fallen. And Christ is calling us away from the world. We continue. Michelle, who is like God? The strong God. Who is as strong as God is? This is the third one that we look at. In Revelation 14 and verse 9, it describes the power of the Lord. and how he will do with the final judgment between those who follow him and those who do not. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, "If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and the presence of the Lamb." Here is describing the act of God to wipe out sin once and for all. The strength of the Lord to put an end to the controversy. The strength of the Lord. And finally, we have, I really like this one. This was our key text. We focused on this parallel specifically. Azariah. The name of Azariah, Jehovah has helped. In order to stand during that time, the Lord has given us the message. "And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. Wherefore come out of her, my people." The Lord has given his grace more time. He has helped us to overcome this. He comes to help his people, to give them another chance, and invite them once again to turn away from the world. The earth was lightened with this angel's glory, we read. Lightened with his glory. As we continue on, we see here that these three angels' messages, they were given, but they're not given just one at a time. We read here that the three angels' messages are to be combined, giving their threefold light to the world. And the other angel in Revelation that John says, "I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory." This represents the giving of the last and threefold message of the world, of the message to the world. Does the other angel have a separate message? No. He says the same thing basically as the second one says. The fourth messenger is to come to revive the other three, to strengthen them in their giving of the message to the world, the last proclamation of the gospel to the world. How are we to treat these messages? We read here in selected messages that the first and second angels' messages were given in 1843 and 1844, and we are now under the proclamation of the third. But all three of the messages are still to be proclaimed. It is just as essential now as ever before that they shall be repeated by those who are seeking for the truth. Is there just one of the messages that is more relevant to our day? They are all just as important. The idea in Revelation 14 is not simply that the second and third angels' messages followed the first in point of time, but they went with him. The three messages are but one threefold message. There are three only in the order of their rise, but having risen, they are to go together, and they are inseparable. All of those characteristics are to come together, and God is to have his people prepared by these three, the three angels' messages. As we continue, we read, why were they given? Because Christ is coming the second time with power unto salvation. And to prepare human beings for this event, he has sent the three angels to prepare us for the great test that is to come to test us. Christ wants to prepare us so that when he comes, we might be ready and say, this is our God, and we have waited for him. And so, we see something happens. Something happens in the very beginning of the story of Daniel. And here we are given insight into how Satan works to pervert these messages. As we read in Revelation 12:12, we are told, therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. And what does Satan aim to do? with his short time. What is the first thing that happens as soon as these three young men and Daniel, as soon as these four arrive in Babylon? What does Satan do? He changes their names. And we are told that they are given new names, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belshazzar, and to Hananiah of Shadrach, to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego. Why is this important? What do these names mean? Now, the new names that they received. We have here a comparison. So for Belshazzar, this was Daniel. It means the keeper of the hidden treasures of Bel. Then the inspiration of the sun for Shadrach, who is like the moon god for Meshach, and servant of the shining fire for Abednego. Okay, so their names were changed into these. We're gonna look at why this is important. Because these names, they represent character. So Satan is trying to change not just their names, but their characters. When Jacob had his name changed from Jacob, it means heel grabber, because he was grabbing at his brother's heel. His name was changed to Israel. It means to contend with God as a prince after his night of wrestling. And so even God himself, when he starts to proclaim his name, he starts to proclaim his character in Exodus. So when we're talking about their names being changed, we're talking about these young men's characters. Satan is going after their characters to change their character. And so we look at the comparison. Daniel, he goes from being God is my judge to hidden treasures. Satan wants to hide deep in your heart the fact that there is a judgment. He doesn't want you to worry about it. We see here that Hananiah, the grace of the Lord, giving honor to the Lord, was changed to the inspiration of the sun. We know how much Satan has had success, and the final point will be on that, on the Sunday versus the true day. Who is like God? Don't worry about that. Who is like the moon god? The moon god. The moon is a reflective surface of the true sun, which is the Lord. But Satan does not want us to focus on the true God. He wants us to focus on the counterfeit. And finally, Azariah, the final one, from Jehovah has helped, to servant of the shining fire. And this is interesting. When we look at the final one, servant of the shining fire, do you remember in Revelation 13 what was one of the defining characteristics of the falsehood that was going on there under Satan? It says here that I beheld another beast coming out of the earth, and this beast, he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven. And the final name that was changed was servant of the shining fire. Satan wants to deceive us, wants to deceive the people of God to become servants of this power. God has already told us way beforehand what will happen. So, this is all in preparation to the test. We see here the test. Finally, the test comes to the people of God, to these three and Daniel. There comes the test. And we read in Daniel chapter 3 and verse 4, Then an herald cried aloud, To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, and all these other instruments and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. And I want to tell you that the same experience that the three young men went to, where they were coerced under penalty of death to worship the golden image, there is nothing different that will happen in the future. For we see in Revelation 13:14 that this power deceives them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast. They should make an image to the beast. And this was the penalty in Daniel in his time, that whoso falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. The 3 young men, this was the penalty of death for those who would not worship the image. And what is it in Revelation 13? The very same. He had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. The concept is the same. There's nothing new under heaven. The same image that was made then, everyone was forced to worship. So in our time, there will be an image made that everyone will be commanded to worship under penalty of death. This is for us. This is God showing us what is to happen in our future. And what happens next? What happens next with the people of God? This is the inspirational part of our study. We look at the comparison now, but now we read something. That the 3 young men, what did they do? Did they bow down and just say, oh, we'll just kind of be in between? We won't completely kneel down, but we'll just bow a little bit to appear as if we're with them. They stood. They were standing together. 3 in the face of thousands before the image. They stood. And Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? And I want us to draw something from this question. Because you see, I believe that this question is more significant than just for that moment in time. The conversion, the calling out, the separation of the 3 young men and Daniel started way before this moment. And if Nebuchadnezzar would have seen him, but I remember you, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when I set up my parties and you were partaking of that food, he could not say that because they didn't. What if they did? This is a deep question. Do you not worship my gods? Who do you worship? Do you really not worship my gods? And I think this is what I would like us to ask ourselves. What are we worshiping? When Satan asks us, what are you worshiping? Are you really not worshiping my gods? We read here a vision. We read a vision by Sister White, and she says, I saw many traveling in this broad road who had written upon them, dead to the world. The end of all things is at hand. Be you also ready. But what happened? They looked just like all the vain ones around them, except a shade of sadness, which I noticed upon their countenances. Why? Because they had their garments and they wanted to be like the world, but their consciences bothered them that they weren't fully. Their conversation was just like that of the gay, thoughtless ones around them. But they would occasionally point with great satisfaction to the letters on their garments, calling for the others to have the same upon theirs. You should be like us. You should wear the same garments. Although we speak, we act the same. They were in the broad way, yet they professed to be of that number who are traveling in the narrow way. And listen to what those who are not in church, the heathen tell them. Listen, those around them would say, there is no distinction between us. We are alike. We dress and talk and act alike. Do you really not serve my gods? This was the question of Nebuchadnezzar. Are you sure? Because these people say to the professors of godliness, are you really sure we don't worship really the same gods? We talk the same. We act the same. We are the same. You just say we're not the same. You say we're not the same. This is our problem for this time. Satan has come in and he has tried to change us, to change our characters. That is his objective. And when we are like this, what are we? The Bible has a word for that. Traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God. Listen to this. Having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. And this is told to us and to those around us, as we read even in our lesson this morning. God does not bring many people to the church if they were to encounter those who are not converted, who would make the truth of God of none effect. God will not work for that church. Because this church, they are traitors. They have a form of godliness. They pretend to be something they are not, and they deny the power of the gospel. And God says, turn away from such people. What is the warning for us today? As Satan is trying, and Satan has even succeeded in making our lives and taking away from the character that they are supposed to be and changing what God has said. We are told here, I was shown the conformity of some professed Sabbath keepers to the world. Oh, I saw that it is a disgrace to their profession, a disgrace to the cause of God. They give a lie to their profession. They think they are not like the world, but they are so near like them in dress, in conversation, and actions that there is no distinction. There is something wrong when those in the world can say, is there actually any difference between us? We do almost the same things. We talk the same things. We get along great. Where is the calling out? Are we responding to the calling out of God that He has for us? And finally, as they are going about their way in the broad way, there comes a moment and they realize the great inquiry of their soul then is, am I prepared to die? Am I prepared to appear before God in judgment and to pass the grand review? Who do we worship? This is the question. The first angel's message is to worship God, to fear God and give glory to Him in the time of His judgment. But who are we worshiping? Because if we do not worship God, we are told that with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved, for this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie, and they will believe it. Jordan said it in his sermon on Revelation 13 at the conference. Before there is coercion, there is deception, and many will be deceived because they have not fallen in love with the truth. Are we in love with the truth, brethren? Do we worship God? Because if we do, we are safe. The three young men, it was not difficult for them to stand before the world. For Daniel, it was not hard to stand before the lions. Why? Because he had kneeled before the King of Kings. And he opened the windows wide so that all the world might know, I worship the true God. And I'm going to pray to Him. And I'm going to stay close to Him. And He will never leave me, nor forsake me. And God gave him strength. As we conclude, the question is, who shall be able to stand? Who shall face the great test? Will we be among those? The question will come from Satan, from the world, and from God Himself even. Who do you serve? Do you serve my gods? Are you sure you don't serve my gods? Because your life kind of says that you're worshiping my gods. What does our life say? Who has our time? Who has our worship? I want to read a statement of three young men that turned the world upside down in that moment with their words, with their conviction, with their character. who though Satan tried to change their names, and he did change their names, but he was not able to change their characters. He was not able to, because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. We do not even have to think about it. Not so. We are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. Our God is strong, the strong God. But if not, even if he doesn't, even if our Lord does not save us from the fiery furnace, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Amen. Will we be able to say like this? Will we be like the three young men standing before the world, before the smartest, greatest, and most eloquent people who tell us to worship the image that has been set up? And will we be able to stand like the three young men and say no? And we do not even have to think about it. We will not worship this image. What was it that enabled them to stand? We read here in the testimonies for the church that faith is the living power that presses through every barrier, overrides all obstacles, and plants its banner in the heart of the enemy's camp. Faith is the victory. They had faith in God that he was able to save them. And even if he doesn't, he will resurrect them. The faith of the Lord. They had faith in their Lord. And now we're going to close our parallel. Something beautiful happens. Something beautiful happens. They are thrown into the fire furnace. Because see, God let them go through the test. God let them, it says here that these three young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they did fall down into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. They were thrown into the fire. But then what happens? What happens in the midst of the burning fiery furnace? What happens next? Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake, and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. The 3 young men were thrown into the fire. And in the fire, Christ was manifest among them. What does this represent? See, we talked about 3 angels. 3 angels' messages that were to be given, joined by a 4th who would strengthen their message, who would confirm their message. And that is only Christ. A revelation of the character of Christ is what is to turn the world upside down. In the midst of the fire, in the midst of trials, in the lions of life, in the fire of life, Christ shows up as the 4th person. And so it is to be in our life. We are the people who claim we are those who are going to give the final message of warning to the world. And this people is represented by this angel that has been so changed that is the very character of Christ showing up. And just as it was in the story of Daniel, that the people looked, Nebuchadnezzar looked, the king and everyone looked, and they saw the 4th one, and it looked like no ordinary person. It looked like the Son of God himself. So in our time, as we give the message, we are to be so conformed to the word of Christ. We are to be so surrendered that when people look at us, they may see only the form, the character of the Son of God himself. Who do we worship? Who do we worship? This is the great power that is to lighten the whole earth with his glory, the glory of Christ. His character and his people is to lighten the world. Are we ready? Are you ready? Am I ready to stand for God? Are we ready to stand? Are we ready to stand before the world and make this proclamation? The question comes, who do you worship? The question given by Nebuchadnezzar to them, who do you worship? Like Daniel in the lion's den, like the 3 young men before the golden image, Christ wants us to have power to stand and to say, I worship the living God and none else. Not the word of man, none else. See, God promises us something. For the 3 young men and for Daniel, God had a message. Way beforehand, He prepared them for the test. He gave them this verse. And I believe it's possible that as the 3 young men were there in the midst of the fire, and as Daniel was there in the den of lions, they were acquainted with the Bible and they remembered this verse that says of the Lord that He shall send from heaven and save me from the reproach of him that would swallow me up. God shall send forth His mercy and His truth when my soul is among lions, and I lie even among them that are set on fire. The 3 young men set on fire. Daniel before the lions. They had Christ in their heart. And Christ was in their midst. And Christ gave them power to stand. And so for us, we read our final word. In Psalms 46, verse 1, we read, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. And therefore, will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea? We will not fear. We will not fear man. We will not fear the world. We will not fear the king. We will fear no one. We shall worship the Lord. And this is my wish and prayer. This is my appeal to us this morning, that we may truly say of our experience, Jehovah has helped us. Jehovah will shine through us. Amen. And as we invite the pianist forward to carry our song, and as we read the song, let us really pay attention to the song. It's called